Welcome to E Squared, Empowerment with Alicia. I'm your host, Alicia Bust, and today I have the great pleasure and honor of connecting you with Dr. Jessica Gold. She is a relationship chemist for entrepreneurs and men in technology. She is on a mission to help men and women finally understand themselves. Girl, you have got a big job because there is so much confusion going on out there. She also received her PhD in chemistry and neuroscience from MIT because she's just like super amazing. She is both ridiculously smart and gorgeous. So, ladies and gentlemen, please get ready for today's amazing show on the neuroscience behind relationships and what actually rules your relationship that you didn't know. So if you don't know, stay tuned because then you probably will. Jessica, Dr. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. I've never had an intro like that. I love it.
You're so welcome. Well, we like to be unforgettable around here, one of a kind. So, Dr. Jessica, please tell us a little bit more about like who you are and why is this so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to this work because I had a really tough time in relationships and I made every single mistake in the book. Um, yeah, and just to say one little correction, I got my undergrad from MIT in
Oh,
chemistry and neuroscience, and then my PhD from UC Berkeley, which was the number one school for your PhD in chemistry at the time. I don't know if it still is, but
thank you.
yeah.
Corrections are super important.
Yeah.
No, I just get so excited sometimes. Just throw it all in one bag.
I love it. I love it. So, I was a scientist and, I did my undergrad at MIT, obviously, which was hard, and then a PhD and then a postdoctoral fellowship. And so that was many, many years, into a decade, over a decade of being in lab and studying all science all the time. And the thing was, in all of those years, I never had a single class in how to be a healthy human. There was
Mm,
never anything about how to have good relationships, how to deal with your emotions, how to communicate wisely, zero zilch, nothing about trauma or your attachment style. I mean, these things weren't really as well known back then when I was in school, but basically, it was just all science all the time. And so I was flying by the seat of my pants when it came to love and relating. And I was also really wedded to logic. I was like, I should figure everything out with logic. Everything in life should be about maximum efficiency. It's all about just solving
right?
problems,
Yes.
controlling things. Yeah.
It's not that. I'm so confused.
Right. And I got married, but it was a very challenging marriage. And I was doing my best. We went to therapy. He is a therapist, my ex-husband. And, I did everything that I thought was right to try to fix it. But I didn't realize that fixing through logic wasn't what was needed. And I didn't understand that, like, the only way I knew how to communicate was to be really defensive and to try to play gotcha or try to figure out who's right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after we got divorced that I came and found the teachings of how to have really successful and passionate relationships. And once I got educated in this, I was furious because I was like, why did nobody tell me this? Why was this nowhere in my entire academic career or just in the water? Like I didn't see anywhere to access this information growing up or in my academic career. I mean, truth be told, I think if it had been there, I probably wouldn't have gone for it because I considered this side of life or these kinds of studies to be like weak or just kind of sort of wishy-washy, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, our lives unfold in the only way that they can. Not that doesn't mean that we're passive observers, but it means like I understand that I needed to go through a difficult marriage and a divorce in order to be propelled to find these teachings.
Right.
And that's okay. And yet I still believe that In my work, I see so much intensive suffering for decades and decades that my clients go through because they are lacking the proper skills and education. And it's really just about undertaking a course of study, being really nerdy about relationships, and then things work so much better. And so it just lit a fire under me, a passion to teach what I had learned so that other people don't have to suffer the same way that I did.
Yes. I think that's so true for so many of us in the coaching field, right? Like they talk about us as wounded healers. There's something that we had to overcome, and we're just like, oh, that was awful. I don't want anybody else in the world to experience the same sort of pain that I went through, no matter like what topic that happens to be on. So lots of people need your help. So I'm really grateful that you were able to make it through your own journey and have that curiosity, right? And that power to want to dive into and be like, what is the dealio? Like, why is
Yeah.
this so hard? And trusting the
Yeah.
faith in yourself enough to think that you can get to the other side of it, right? Which you did, and then some, because now you're guiding other people in their own personal journey. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So for some people who have never heard of neuroscience, what is that?
Mm.
Like, let's
Yeah.
start at the very beginning before we dive into the rest of it.
Absolutely. So, when I was studying neuroscience at MIT, it's called brain and cognitive science. And it's the science of how your brain works, how it functions. It's from the nitty-gritty, like on the level of the electrical impulses that your neurons are sending to the whole systems of how, the neural networks of your brain are firing together. And it's just the study of the brain, but from a real scientific point of view. It's not psychology. Yeah.
It's the physical aspect of the science of how the brain works, not necessarily the mental, emotional side of how it works.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
And
Mhm.
then what you learn, and then you went to Asia and you learned a bunch of really cool things over there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that happened was when I came to the end of my postdoctoral fellowship, I was studying addiction and studying the brain. Um, I I had always wanted to be a professor, but I didn't see a way forward in my science career at that point because to be a professor, you had to pick a topic and really get behind it and then go out and sell it and raise money to fund your lab, to fund your research.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, and I was like petrified at the idea of doing that. And I also didn't want to keep working in lab. I remember one day I was standing in lab with like a multi-channel pipetter, which is this big machine that's really hard to use, and pipetting a radioactive substance. So I had to be really careful, and I was all alone on a Saturday, like into these 96 well plates over and over again. And there's a lot of repetitive things in because I had switched from organic chemistry to biochemistry at that point. And I just remember standing there and all of a sudden had it was like this voice of my heart said, "You're not supposed to be doing this anymore." And I was like, "What?"
You're
No,
like,
no, no, no,
I've
no.
invested so much time.
So much blood, sweat, and tears into this. I cannot walk away from my academic career.
Yeah.
But I knew that it was right. And but I had no idea what else to do. I mean, what do you do with an organic chemist? Nobody knows what to do with an organic chemist outside of lab. Like, there's nothing I can do.
You're like, you have one job.
Yeah. You have one job, make the molecules react. That was your job. You're not doing
That's
it. What's wrong? So fortunately, I had the opportunity with my ex-husband. We went traveling for a year to go say yes to what scared me, what I would normally be closed to. And I was closed to a lot of things at that point in my life. And I've told this story many, many times. So if any of you have heard of me before, you might have heard it on other podcasts, but so I'll keep it brief. But essentially, I ended up having a spiritual awakening and a sexual awakening. I didn't know what that was. I wasn't like consciously looking for it. I didn't even believe in that stuff. I was like, what is going on?
These are weird feelings. Mm.
Yeah, but I had an experience that finally checkmated my mind.
Ah,
Um, where my mind was like, "Brr," like this makes zero sense. I have no frame of reference for what I'm feeling or experiencing, but something in me is changing very dramatically and deeply. I had like this huge awakening of energy.
Cool.
And I decided to stay at a school where I could study Eastern mysticism more, where I could study, instead of objective reality, I could study my subjective experience. I had never turned my vector of awareness inward on my inner world because I'd been raised that you just don't do that. Um,
Sure. Like so many of us.
yes. But I decided to stay because I thought something in me is trying to heal, is trying to come out. And what if I let myself be happy for once and just stay where I feel happy things are sweet instead of forcing myself out of discipline to achieve more.
Yeah.
So I stayed at this school that I found, several different schools between like India, Thailand, Bali, for over 4 years. Honestly, I was going back and forth between California and Asia for 7 years,
Oh, amazing.
and undertook a whole entire course of study. I like to say I gave myself another PhD. Um, so I've been on more retreats than I can count, silent meditation retreats, kundalini retreats, shadow work retreats, trained as a teacher of sacred sexuality. And I remember I had homework at one point in my teacher training program where it was to go and talk to strangers about their sex lives. And so I went to a restaurant on the island where I was living and just was like, hey, I'm in training and I'm supposed to ask you these questions about your experience of sex. Are you open to it? And it was so much fun.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's definitely a fun thing to do. I've had just random neutral based conversations with strangers about sex. It tends to be rather entertaining.
yeah, and I was like, and I realized because I had had a lot of experience in the San Francisco Bay Area of like alternative communities and living on in the schools that I was living in, studying Eastern thought, non-dual spirituality. I'd had enough experience at that point that I was like, oh, I can hold this. Whatever they're telling me, like I don't feel activated or ashamed or embarrassed. I was like, I really can be with people in this. And
That's
it went
beautiful.
deep so fast. Yeah. So then I decided to continue getting trained, study what makes for passionate relationships. And that was what happened in Asia. Well, that's like,
That's amazing.
yeah.
So like what I'm hearing is like you were able to connect your head with your heart and come to a more balanced place where you were able to both empower yourself and anyone else that came across your path.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Head, heart, and gut. Yeah,
Yeah,
three
yeah.
centers.
The
Mhm.
head, heart, and gut. Like being able to
Mhm.
listen to our intuition and
Mhm.
like heart's desire.
And only later did I learn that we actually have so many neurons in our gut. It's like the size of a cat brain. And so,
Crazy sauce.
yes, and that these neurons are 80% afferent, which means they primarily run signals from your gut to your brain. And that there's a whole part of your brain that receives these signals but that doesn't have access to words, that it communicates to
Mm,
you in images, and so that there's actually a neuroscience basis for intuition. It's not just
fascinating.
wishy-washy. Yeah.
So it makes me think so much about like animals
Hmm.
and the
Yeah,
connection
you're a
from their,
horsewoman.
yeah, I am. And like from their connection from their gut. And they have some people who do like the animal communication and whatnot, and they say they get like pictures
Yeah.
in that
Mhm.
sort of connection. It's just such a fascinating concept into
Yes.
the crossing between science and woo. I always say magic is just science not yet explained, right?
Yes.
Because at one point, like back in history, before we had discovered things and how they worked, and everybody just called it magic, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the times that's true. Sometimes I think there's things that just aren't explainable, and I don't need science to explain them. I don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
go in the realm of pseudoscience. We don't need that. I'm okay with things being mysterious.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's cool. I just
but
think
other
it's for some
times,
people that's starting the conversation, right? The
yeah,
beginning of the crossover
right.
and
But
opening.
other times it is amazing how much like in the Eastern traditions, there was such a careful study of our inner world. And even though
Mm,
the words they were using were pre-science words like nadis, or energy, or chakras, or things like this, I think when we've learned more and more about the nervous system, there's a lot of similarities. I'm not trying to make a one-to-one correlation,
sure.
um,
Yeah.
but they understood, I think their sense of like channels and energy was they were intuiting that we had a nervous system even before science had told us that it did indeed exist. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of wisdom there in the woo.
No, that's super cool. There is a lot of wisdom. I love it. It's like working with people on their intuition and gathering greater amounts of understanding. So tell us a little, let's get like really into it, like the neuroscience of relationships. Like, what does
Yes.
that
So
mean?
yeah, so what is really going on in your brain when you're relating with someone, and why is it different than what you think? So it really blew my mind when I learned this stuff, and it changed my whole approach to relating, my whole motivation for how I show up and how I understand my partner. And so I think this is just really important to know. But so for me, being a very left-brained person, I just simply didn't believe or didn't understand how much of what's going on for us are not in the explicit system. So there's actually two different systems in the brain. One has beta waves, one has alpha waves. I mean, there's more systems than that, but the beta wave system is like associated with our explicit system where we can verbalize things that are in our conscious awareness. It's associated with decision making, logic, analysis, knowing what time it is, things like that. And where I came from, it was very much as if that was the only thing that exists, or
Mm,
that's the most important thing that exists, or that's the most powerful thing that exists.
yeah.
But nothing could be further from the truth.
Mm,
So, what's actually governing not just our relationships, but our lives are the implicit systems in our brain. And by implicit systems, I mean systems that are below our conscious awareness. And these systems are far more powerful and faster than our explicit systems. So these are things like the amygdala is part of the implicit system, the subcortical regions of the brain that aren't the prefrontal cortex, the nonverbal regions of the brain, and the right hemisphere. And these systems communicate in emotions and images. And they are profoundly important because they tell our body what to do faster than we can think about it. And they're essential for our survival. So these systems operate on the scale of like a quarter to a 40th of a second.
wow.
And um, what's going on is that, and the reason these are important is, for example, when we are small, we are learning about the world. And when you learn about the world, you need to know, for example, how to go from walking on a flat surface to walking upstairs, right? Or from walking on concrete to walking on grass. And you need to learn that, and then you need it to go into your implicit memory. And it's as if you just know how to do it. You don't, every time you go and face a flight of stairs, you don't have to think, how do I walk upstairs? Like it would be overwhelming if we were going through the world every day and having to relearn all of these things and having to actually think about it.
Yeah.
These are all in our brain, in the implicit system. But the other thing that's in the implicit system that governs our relationships is um, how we expect to be treated, um, what it means when someone raises their voice at us, um, what we think of our self-worth. Um, so all of these sort of values and beliefs, we think we know what they are, but actually what our conscious mind thinks they are is usually very different from what our implicit systems know that our values and beliefs are. And these values and beliefs are held in place in our brain because they're attached to different emotions. You see, the brain fires in networks. networks of many different connections and neurons at the same time. And so there will be a network that fires that's associated with how you expect to be treated in relationship, and it's attached to all these different emotions. And what's going on is that when you are processing your experience of the here and now, the
Mhm.
part of you that does that, the prefrontal cortex, receives input from neurons that are processing your present time sensory information, like what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling. And it also receives input from these implicit systems that hold everything you've ever remembered or learned or experienced. And the input from the implicit systems is vastly more powerful and has like a much heavier weight in how you react than the input coming from your present moment senses. So don't worry, I'm going to summarize what this means for you in a moment.
Stay with us, folks. We're gonna get there. It's a whole like big beautiful web of knowledge.
Yes, exactly. And so what one of my teachers, or this woman, Julianne Taylor Shore, she teaches about neuroscience and relationships, and I love her. And she learned a lot of this from Dan Siegel, who's a very famous neuroscientist who talks about the brain. But what she likes to say is your brain sees the world through history-colored glasses. So all of the experiences that you're having now are associated also with everything you've ever learned and your memory of similar experiences and emotions associated with them. So what does this mean for you in relationship? But I'll just pause there for a moment in case you want to say something.
So many things. How we consciously react versus how we subconsciously react with overlays from our life's history and more of like impulse and expectations.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not only reacting to now, but to stored memories and ways that were trained in you from early childhood. And Stan Tatkin, who's a master of attachment theory, says that it's actually the faster acting implicit systems in your brain that run the show in your primary attachment relationship. So, all of these deeply embedded memories and emotions associated with how you think you should be treated and what someone talking to you that way means or what that touch meant, like these implicit systems that operate so much faster than your conscious awareness are actually what is running the show in your relationship. What that means is
Like this more.
that so okay, what that means for us. Most of us go through relationships believing that we should just keep the peace, and that you don't want to experience uncomfortable emotions, that things should always be happy. You don't ever want to upset anyone. And also that you should use logic and argue the facts in order to resolve things. But based on the neuroscience of how your brain works, that is exactly the wrong way. That is ineffective.
Don't argue, just listen, but don't get pushed around. But still talk. Oh my gosh, there's so many different things. What did we do?
Yeah. So I was totally wedded to this for most of my life. I thought, oh, I'm just going to defend myself and argue and try to see who's right and try to talk my partner out of what he's feeling, try to show him if he only understood logically what I'm saying, that he wouldn't be upset.
You're like, just stay with me. Just stay with me. Okay. So I'm going to write a diagram. Okay. Just like we need a Venn diagram happening. And in the middle is what actually we need to do. Over here's your perspective. Over here's my perspective. Okay.
Uh-huh. Right, exactly. So, but you know what that's doing? That is engaging only the explicit system in your brain.
Yeah.
That does not help or create change or actually address what's really going on. Um, so what I want to get into here now is emotions.
Emotions.
So,
Yes, emotions are very important. There's such a
yeah,
wide array of
we
emotions.
are terrified of our partner's emotions, specifically because they're usually activating those implicit memories in our brain of like when we were little and a caregiver got mad at us or kids were cruel to us, and it takes us back into that time of being terrified. So it's understandable, we want to avoid that. We want to keep the peace. We want, especially men tell me that they are told the one piece of advice they get is to keep her happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, what they think is going to keep us happy isn't always the same thing as what would make us happy because oftentimes listening isn't happening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or advocating for our needs isn't happening. And so I like that breakdown of communication in general.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're operating under the advice to just keep her happy, then you're creating an unsafe environment for her where it's not okay for her to be her full self. And that kills passion because there's no trust and no respect, and she will not feel safe to open to you. But the other thing I want to say, um, it goes both ways too. I know that women can be very avoidant of emotions in their male partner and very, very critical of men and shaming of men. So I'm not trying to hold up. This isn't a gender war. I'm not trying to figure out who's most right here.
No,
We're
that's not what we're
all
doing here
humans.
at all.
Yeah. We are all humans having a human experience, and all of our brains work in the way that I'm describing.
Yes.
So the thing is that while most of us believe that we are thinking beings who sometimes feel, the reality is that we are primarily feeling beings who sometimes think.
I love that. That needs to be like a bumper sticker. Just drive
Yeah,
around town. Remind everybody.
you're so good. I love that.
We'll put it on all the sports cars so it's really obvious. Sports
All the
cars
red
and
cars.
minivans that go to like, so we're like the flashy cars that get people's attention and the minivans for all the parents that are stuck in line at school picking up their kids at the end of the day.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be hilarious if that was on all the cyber trucks, those really pointy things?
Yes. That would be super funny. Like, okay, we need to have like, yeah, we need to figure out what all the super techie people are doing and all the people that we, it's not just
Yeah.
tech people who struggle with their feelings, y'all. That's not what we're saying right now. Okay, just calm down. It's not what we're saying. Trying to experience like show lots of emotions during our podcast here today. We're trying to have fun with it.
Yeah. And so, what I had to learn because I was taught that emotions are weak, they're only for women, they're a distraction from the real work of life, which is being efficient, achieving, and making more money. Um, and that is actually cruel and very harmful to us as humans, but also to your relationship if you're trying to get away from all emotions or seeing them as a bad thing. Emotions are actually a functional experience that help us make sense of the world, and they let our body know what we need to do next without us having to think about it. When you're having an emotion, again, that's going to be triggered by the implicit system faster than your thoughts about it. The emotion cues your brain, oh, I need to send blood to like a particular muscle group, right? I need to get ready for X, Y, or Z. And so they are essential and they are good things. Um, I know now everyone's thinking, tell me that when my wife is screaming at me. How is that a good thing?
Well, she's getting the experience, the emotion out of her body so it doesn't go back into her body and create dis-ease or disease and like different compensating factors that can create like those headaches that you don't want us to have so that you don't get laid. Like these are very important processes. You need to let her scream so you can the bad scream so you can have the good scream later. I mean, come on, like what do you want out of life? It's
Okay. Oh, so to that point, when I start
Dr.
talking,
Jessica's like, I've never had an interview like this before. This is very different. You didn't know you were getting comedy and neuroscience today. Like, this is just like a special experience.
it's so good. It's perfect. This is what this neuroscience needs.
Silliness. We need more silliness in neuroscience.
Yeah, we do. Um, so what often happens when people start to think of emotions or realize that they're so important is we swing from one extreme of denying, suppressing emotions to the other of believing that, oh, well, then we have to allow everything. And neither of those extremes is helpful. Okay, so we don't want to suppress and ignore or look down on emotions, and we also don't want to let them run our relationships. Um, yeah, and we don't want to allow ourselves to be harmed, to have our boundaries crossed. Um, right. So the challenge that we have as human beings is to integrate these two systems, the implicit and the explicit. Um,
Jessica, how do we do that?
yes. Well, it is a really, really deep path and a deep practice if you are called to it. And today, because we are asking different things from our relationships than ever before in human history, it's a path that we all have to walk if you want to actually have a real relationship with passion. And so, one of the ways that you do this is you start to get really humble and realize, oh my gosh, I have a tendency to let my emotions take over and just totally react. I'm just reacting in a hair trigger without any of my prefrontal cortex involved. And
Like knock on the door. Hey, are you available, prefrontal cortex? It's been kind of rough over here. I could use some support. And your cortex is like, I don't know, man. Like it's tense today, a little intense. I might need a drink before handling you today. Or you're
yeah.
like, the other one's like, I got you. Like, there's this really great bar I've been meaning to check out lately.
So that's exactly what you do. You stop when you have that conversation between the two parts of your brain. No, but the reality is, okay, so this is it. This is what you do. You learn to pause. And, one of my teacher calls it the ledge of freedom. So, yeah,
Hmm.
that space between the impulse and how you choose to respond to the impulse, that's your whole freedom and power in life.
For sure. I
Yeah.
agree with that. I'm like, all joking aside, that is very
Oh.
important.
And so, but it's hard because our implicit system and our emotions are going to act more quickly than our prefrontal cortex, and we can't change that.
Yeah. Brene Brown has this great thing where I was reading one of her books, I forget which one it was, and she twists her ring 3 times before giving an answer, even if she feels like it's going to be a yes. Instead of
Ooh.
creating that space to like breathe and drop in.
Yes. Yes. So that is actually very recommended by a lot of my teachers is to create a gesture. It's easier to do than words. So maybe hand on your heart or twisting your ring 3 times or giving yourself a timeout and committing to that gesture no matter what. Just giving yourself that pause. Sometimes the pause can be 5 seconds. Sometimes you're like, nope, I'm way too activated and you gotta go take a timeout for like 30 minutes or a day.
Yeah, sometimes I just get in
Um,
my car and drive away. Like for me, like driving out into a space, especially when it's more expansive where I can see a lot, versus like you drive in the city and you're just like, claustrophobic still sometimes, like in New York. But if you drive out and you can see mountains or just openness, and then you can take all that energy and you can put it out, and it feels like you have more space. Right? It makes it easier for my nervous system to calm down. I said it's the strangest thing. Even if I am happy where I live, the further I drive away from wherever it is that I live, the happier I am.
yeah.
This
Well,
is
there's
really
some,
good for me.
I mean, the environment like that has a big effect on us. There's been studies that shown, looking at a body of water actually has a calming effect.
Yeah, I love the
So
ocean. That helps me a lot.
yeah. But the other thing that is actually a secret superpower.
Here's my
I knew
cake.
you would like that. You ready?
I'm
So
ready.
it's compassion. And before everyone listening to this starts to vomit and think that being kind to yourself is weak, let me tell you the neuroscience behind it. When you're compassionate towards yourself, it actually releases GABA, which is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in your brain. And it's been shown to actually calm down the firing in your subcortical regions, like the amygdala, in the centers that are responsible for anger, pain, anxiety. So it is actually an incredibly smart and powerful move to get your brain back into regulation, back into integration, so then you can make wise choices for yourself instead of acting out of reactivity.
Super smart. Unless you're fighting a lion or something, like acting out of reactivity, or like grabbing a child that's about to get hit by a car as they're trying to run across the
Yeah.
street. Like these are times when like reacting, that's like a positive thing, right? It's a survival. But short of survival, I think that taking a moment to like pause is super, super important, especially if you're already feeling overwhelmed in general.
Mhm.
Because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really not a fan of eating crow. It's not fun. It's not tasty. I've eaten a
No.
lot of it in my life. I don't feel like it's like when people drink too much tequila and they smell tequila and they're like, I'm gonna gag. Like for me, that's crow.
Yeah.
I smell the idea of crow and I'm like, no thanks.
Yeah.
So if I don't take those moments, right, then there's a chance that I'm gonna have to eat crow.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like
And it's hard.
implementing discipline, yeah, is so important because you're like, nobody likes to clean up messes. Nobody likes to feel like they're a piece of shit
Oh,
because they
it's
did the
so
wrong
hard.
thing and you get all keyed into all the stories from your life. Like we've all got stories, right? If anybody out there thinks that like somebody is beyond stories, like it's unlikely. They might exist on the planet. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I think somebody on some level has some like thing that gets in there sometimes when they get keyed in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's hard to take that step and say, "Oh, I need to clean this up." So, it's so much easier to pause. But what I want to leave you with is also the idea of respect. So when you see your partner having a lot of emotions, instead of thinking, "Oh my God, how weak or illogical, or she shouldn't feel that way, or he shouldn't feel that way," I want you to stop and realize they are reacting to everything they've ever learned and patterns from childhood, in addition to what's happening now. And that Um, again, you're supposed to have emotions. It is a very powerful thing. It's how our brain functions. So to just have a basic sense of respect of like, oh, okay, this is what's going on for them. I get it. So changing your lens from oh shit or how weak or how ugh to okay, I understand what's going on. This is how the brain is supposed to work. It's not a weakness. And at the same time, you do not have to, let yourself be insulted or receive a lot of things that feel violent to your system. You also are empowered to have your own boundaries. But boundaries are about love in this case. It's about where you two want to connect. And I encourage you to set them with loving kindness of like, my dear, I understand this is upsetting to you and this is too much for me right now. I'm happy to talk to you when you've calmed down a bit,
Yeah.
right? And then you can, if he or she continues, you can say, I can't talk to you right now. I'm gonna have to like go in a different room, right? You are changing your behavior to protect yourself. But they're set with so much love. Because you're saying, I want to be in relationship with you. I want to be here with you. I'm not trying to build a wall, and I can't relate to you in this exact way right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a long time to be able to have those kinds of communication cycles with people. I was with someone in my 20s for like 6 or 7 years, and man, that guy knew where all my buttons were, all of the
Mm.
buttons. And no one could take me to 0 to 60 like he could.
Hmm.
And so after a few years, doesn't need to take that long, folks. That's why we have people like Dr. Jessica and myself as a confidence coach. Um, but I got to the point where I tell people I'm like I will typically give you at least one shot across the bow before like if I'm in a hyper reactive space and I'm just like, hey, so if I was on the phone with my ex, I'd just be like, hey. If you don't stop with this line of communication, I'm going to hang up on you. Like,
Yeah.
here's your shot across the bow. Like, this is your
Yep.
opportunity. Like, I don't want to like have us have breakdowns in our relationship,
Yeah.
but this is going to be the result if you continue on with this action. And so sometimes I would hang up on him midstream in conversation because he would just keep going on. And then I'd give some time and some space, and then we could come back in conversation, like work through whatever.
Yeah.
And my mom and I, God, oh, God love her, because this isn't just about romantic relationships. This is about friendship too and family.
Yeah, totally.
My mom and I have worked very hard to build this phenomenal relationship that we have. And so even as much as we love and respect each other, like we're still human. And if she like hits one of my triggers in like a particular way,
Yeah.
I will hang up on her.
Oh.
But we have so much love and faith in one another that we know because we've created that track record for each other, right? That when I calm down enough to be able to call back, I will. And then if I need to apologize, I do. I eat that crow. It's gross and
Mm.
disgusting. And I apologize. And then I tell her why it happened.
Yeah.
Right? Because like having that awareness is so important, especially if you're wanting to not continue the pattern.
Yeah.
Like apologizing sometimes just like it's great, but it's not necessarily functional like long term if you're not self-aware enough and humble and honest and transparent enough to say this is what was happening for me.
Yeah.
And these are the things that I am taking action on. I'm taking radical accountability for to look at the root of what that is, to not put us in relationship in that position for those things to continue. So maybe it's just like, hey, I didn't have enough sleep and I haven't had breakfast or caffeine yet. And so I need you to wait until this time to talk to me. You
Yeah.
know, it's like if I'm being cranky, ask me like four questions. Like, have you gone to the gym today? Which helps me personally a lot with my mental health. Have you
Yeah.
had caffeine? Have you eaten? What kind of sleep did you get? Right? And if all of those things are good, then be like, who have you recently talked to? Like, who are you pissed off at that you're wrong targeting at me? Right? Be like, I didn't do this. Why are you being cranky at me? Right?
That's
Because
such an adult way of relating. That's beautiful.
thank
Yeah.
you. And that's like one of those things like about Chris, my boyfriend, is that usually like if he has like made a mistake or whatever, um he will like give it enough space and time because he's human too. He can be cranky and he gets to have the autonomy of his time to reflect
Mm.
and process without me like poking at him.
Yeah.
We're pretty good. We're not perfect. Sometimes we're just like pissy with each other, and that's just part of being human. But like most of the time, we do a pretty good job. So like,
Yeah.
but he will reflect and he'll apologize if need be and make amends and then analyze and go to the root of whatever the cause was and take action. And that's one of the things that I respect and love tremendously about him as a human being and why he's such a phenomenal infinite family coach and what he does to help fathers in
Mm.
like building legacy is because he lives from that space of role modeling,
Mhm.
right? And being so transparent with people about like he says like I'm not a perfect person and being able to be in that space of transparency with like your coaching or just modeling as we walk through the world
Yeah.
and people who listen to us and watch us that we may never know have witnessed that, right? And so it's that awareness.
Yeah. And I don't think perfection is the goal. I mean, it's definitely not the goal. Yeah.
Boring and
So,
unrealistic.
yeah. Um, what we've found is that all human relationships are a dance of harmony, disharmony, and repair. And
Mm,
and when they've studied mothers or primary attachment figures with babies, that's what they've actually found. It's not one uninterrupted state of bliss and connection. It's it's harmony, disharmony, and then you repair and they come back into connection. And what I think what might be perfect is allowing yourself to have disharmony in your relationship and being willing to repair.
yeah.
Um, and I think we get stuck. I know a lot of the old ways of being where you take your relationship for granted. You're playing out unexamined roles, running unconscious narratives about who you're each supposed to be. You take it for granted. You don't do anything about it. But actually, if you want to take on this path of integrating your brain and not having the implicit system and the reactivity run the show, then you do need to put your relationship front and center and realize, wow, if I want to show up in alignment with my integrity and my values, I actually need to take really good care of myself. Um, and I need to really care about how I treat my partner, especially when I'm stressed, angry, or tired or hungry. Um,
Yeah, I think front loading your partner is really important too. Because if you know you're in a space where you're already agitated, and you could just be like, hey, these things are happening. It's not about you at all. If I'm bitchy with you at all, please don't take it personally. Um, if I
yeah,
cross any lines, like please talk to me about it later because I'm not going to be super receptive to you
right.
calling me out when I'm in this space. So if it's not like life or safety in this moment, like probably not a great
Not a
time
great time.
to try and like challenge whatever is happening, right?
Right.
Like boundaries are super important sometimes. Those boundaries are like, you know what? You're being a pain in my ass right now. And so I'm gonna go over here. So I
Mm-hmm.
just don't really
Abs
want to deal with whatever state you're
yeah.
in right now because you can't regulate and I don't feel like becoming dysregulated and triggered by your state. So that's why like healthy boundaries and having enough love and faith in the other person, right? That you know that you'll be able to come back together and have a
Yeah.
healthy conversation when you're in a less like dysregulated state. Um,
Yes. Uh, absolutely. And I had the impression that what I should do, well, basically I grew up in a culture where I wasn't taught to take very good care of myself, right?
mm,
And so I would be hungover or I would not get enough sleep or I would just be let myself get super stressed out and triggered about work. And then I would just take it all out on the relationship because the relationship was just assumed to be there for that.
right.
And,
This is my dumping ground.
yeah, and like Esther Perel says, don't give the best of yourself at work and just bring the leftovers home. Or another image she has is a lot of people treat their relationship like a cactus, like something they like hardly ever have to pay attention to and they never water it. And then one
I'll
day they're
bloom once a
surprised.
year.
Yeah, but then they're surprised when it dies. Um, but like in
Oh, that's
order
so funny.
to walk this path of integrating your brain and pausing and like wanting to really show up with love for your partner every day, I find that I have to take exquisite care of myself, right? Which is having boundaries around my sleep, around my time, around like how I treat my body, how I eat, and things like how I party, things like this. And it has made a huge, huge difference. Um, because as they
Oh,
say, as we know, like your relationship and the health of it is the foundation of your success in life. And it's the foundation of the meaning that you get from your life. Um, so
absolutely.
that's what I had to say.
Well, that's fantastic. And it's perfectly timed since we have 4 minutes left before our hour's up. So, everybody, thank you so much for watching here today. Dr. Jessica, we are almost done, but we're going to steal you for a couple more minutes. One, I would love to thank you for your candor, your wisdom, your intellect, and your beautiful life journey of which you've shared with us this afternoon. And people that might be interested in you, where can they find you to like completely radically alter their relationships and their lives by having you as their coach?
Well, you can apply on my website. It's bliss-science.com, www.bliss-science.com. You can find me on Medium. I write under the handle at Dr. Jessica Gold. I have an Instagram where you can learn more about me and a Facebook group called Passionate Relationships for powerful men and couples.
I love it. So, our last question, which is always fun to ask people, is who inspires you in the world today?
So, one of my big role models and inspirations is the woman I mentioned before, Esther Perel. I call her the grande dame of eroticism. Um, I don't know if she's in her 70s, she's a wise elder, but she just brings this embodied sense of the erotic, but not in any prurient way, in a really like high class way. She's a woman a world-renowned therapist who's done a huge body of work, written at least two books on desire in long-term marriages, but she really embodies it herself, even as an elder. And I just love how classy she is about it, how unabashed she is about talking about passion and sexuality and redefining the erotic. She really brought this European sensibility around what is erotic to America. And it's this more refined sense where erotic doesn't mean sex. She calls it is the imagination of sex,
Mm,
the
yeah,
playfulness, and anything can be erotic,
it's true.
which dovetails a lot with many of the teachings that I received from Eastern traditions. And what I mean by anything can be erotic, not sexualized, but pulsing with aliveness, vitality, and this beautiful sensuality.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that differentiation there because I do believe that a lot of people get confused. I had just finished her book, Mating in Captivity,
Mm-hmm.
um, while I was flying back and forth from all the places these last couple months, which has been really fun. So
That's
everybody should
fantastic.
definitely check it out. It's a very interesting book. He's a phenomenal person. I am in complete agreement. And so always so many fun things to do and say as we explore our beingness in this amazing journey of life. So if you're interested in coming to see me for any of my confidence coaching, you can go to elisiabus.com. You can find me on Instagram. I'm all over the place. And if you'd like to be interviewed by me, please do shoot me a DM. So until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Jessica.
Bye.
Bye.